everybody. Thank you all for coming to the seventh concert in our Vaughan Williams series, which tonight very much celebrates Vaughan Williams, the text setter, through song and the way he set a lot of his text to music. Just a quick word on the programme, which I hope you've all managed to grab hold of. We actually start with a bit of Finzi. Vaughan Williams and Finzi were great friends, but Finzi himself was also a great setter of text, wrote a lot of songs, a lot of music. And actually the piece that Jago is going to play this evening, I thought we could open the concert with this piece, because somehow it feels as though it could be set to words, actually, the way that he's written this piece. So we start with that, then we go into a couple of songs. Firstly, Sky Above the Roof, sung by Edward as a baritone. You'll see later on in the programme, same piece, but actually sung by mezzo, by Emma, just to hear how two different voices can perform a similar text. Tom will then sing Britten's The Chorimaster's Burial. The reason that one is in there is that Britten, again, one of the great setters of text, but very much on the back of Vaughan Williams, took a lot of influence from Vaughan Williams, and just to get a slightly different feel. Matthew Dobson, one of our English teachers, will then very kindly give a quick presentation on music and poetry, some of the poets that we'll hear this evening. Before Ava-Louisa will give us one of the folk song settings. Vaughan Williams very much known for his folk song arrangements. And then there's a quick note from Catherine Smith, who is our wonderful archivist, who will give a quick word on Vaughan Williams during his time here. And then we finish with a song from one of Vaughan Williams's possibly most famous song cycles, Songs of Travel. Lancelot will sing with us so London. Enjoy.
he liked best. The one whose sense suits mounty fame, and perhaps we should see to him in stream like the As soon as I knew that his spirit was gone, I thought this is due, and spoke thereupon. I thinks that the vicar, the reps of his quicker, than falls out of doors in these frost and wars. That old-fashioned way requires a fine day, and it seems to me it had better not be. Hence, that afternoon, though never knew he that his wish could not be. To get through it faster, they buried the master without any tune. But 'twas said that when at the dead of next night the vicar looked out, there struck on his came thronged round about, where the frost was graying the headstone grass. A band all in white like the saints in church class, singing and playing, singing and playing the ancient stave. By the master's grave. Such the tenor man told when he had grown old.
Perhaps in common with many people in this room, my favourite time at Charterhouse is often the end of term. But it's not why you might think. In the closing minutes of the final chapel, the organ breathes into life, and we all stand and sing loudly, Jerusalem. I nearly always have to hold back a tear. I think part of it is a sense of pride in the school, its history, buildings, and people, and a sense of being part of something bigger and better than myself. But also, without a doubt, it's that magical combination of the words and the music. Blake's extraordinary images, ancient feet, burning gold, satanic mills, sleeping swords. They seem to rise up out of Parry's music like beautiful sparks from a fire. I suspect that not many of us, myself included, really understand those words as we sing them. But that doesn't matter. We're brought together by them and moved by them. I suppose it's in the capacity to move us, to get into our hearts, as well as our heads, that music gives to poetry. Philip Larkin said that poetry is a machine for reproducing emotion. If poetry is an engine, then I think that music is like strapping a nitrous oxide turbo to it, as Vin Diesel does to his Dodge Charger in Fast and the Furious 2. Or perhaps another metaphor would work. I know that many students, poetry can seem like a locked door. I like to think of music as the key to that door, the key to take you from the dry, dusty intellectual realm and into the vivid colours of the emotional and even the spiritual realm. Our instinctive love of that emotional stimulation means the relationship between poetry and music has a rich history. The ancient Greeks sang their poems to the accompaniment of the lyre. The troubadours sung them underneath first-floor windows to disinterested lovers in medieval France. And some of Shakespeare's most vivid poetry occurs in his plays' songs. We only need to look at the success of the likes of Jay-Z, Bob Dylan, and Adele to see today more than ever that when words and music work in harmony, they can capture our attention and our hearts. I just want to briefly consider the lives and careers of a few poets whose words have been set to music tonight. Firstly, Vaughan, author of Sky Above the Roof. When I first read about Paul Vaughan's life, he struck me as a sort of 19th century Keith Richards. But the more I read, the more I realised that Keith Richards is a diluted 20th century Vaughan. Known as one of the cursed poets who wrote about drug addiction, death, he left his wife for fellow poet Arthur Rimbaud, who he shortly after proceeded to shoot with a pistol in a jealous rage, before somewhat anticlimactically licking his emotional wounds while teaching French at a private school in Boston Spa. He died in Paris at the age of 50, lost in a greenish haze of absinthe and opium, and his mysterious, darkly symbolic works were set to music by the great composers of the day and have been deeply influential on modernist poetry. Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Whither Must I Wander, was a child of the British Empire in the High Victorian period. After graduating with a law degree, he determined to be a writer, but after realising that he had absolutely nothing to write about, set off around Europe in a canoe, and in perhaps one of the most successful gap years in history, went on to write Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, and some fine, though these days underappreciated poetry. Thomas Hardy, author of The Choirmaster's Burial, one of those people you secretly love to hate. He's good at everything without even trying. Well, everything apart from love. Starting his career as a star architect, he went on to write some of the 19th century's finest novels. But not content with that, at 70 he started to publish poetry and went on to write some of the most moving and influential English verse of the 20th century. His poetry demonstrates an immense capacity for human sympathy and an ability to find the beautiful in the mundane and profundity in the humdrum. I would recommend his collection entitled Poems 1912 to 13. It contains a beautiful series of elegies for his first wife, Emma. They were totally estranged for nearly 30 years of their long marriage, but when she died, he was inconsolable. And when he died, they buried his ashes in Poets' Corner, Westminster Abbey, with his heart next to Emma in Dorset. Though cultural giants of their age, these poets always remained students of their own passions. The fruits of that sometimes exuberant, sometimes painful study are made more vivid by the genius of the composers who set their words to music, and of course by the great talent of our musicians. Thank you.
Good evening. I've been asked to just say a few words about Vaughan Williams' musical education at Charterhouse and also about his links with both Robinites and Saunderites. So, Ralph came to Charterhouse in Long Quarter 1887, intending to join his older brother Hervey in Saunderites. In those days, it wasn't uncommon for pupils to arrive at different points throughout the year. They didn't all arrive together in September as they do now. And if space was not immediately available in their chosen house, they were temporarily allocated to Robinites, which acted as a small junior house with only about 20 younger pupils in it. So far, so good. Ralph stayed briefly in Robinites and then duly moved to Saunderites in the buildings that are now occupied by Sutton. The headmaster, William Haig Brown, was also housemaster of Saunderites, and so it was seen as the most prestigious house, favoured by the wealthiest families, the nobility and royalty. For example, Ralph overlapped with Prince Albert of Schleswig-Holstein, the son of Princess Helena and one of Queen Victoria's grandsons. Far more unusual was the fact that 2 years later, Ralph then returned to Robinites on the invitation of the housemaster, George Robinson, who asked him to return and to be head monitor. It's not unreasonable to assume that Robinites offered a much calmer atmosphere than the much larger Saunderites house, far more conducive to composing and music practice, and with the added bonus of encouragement from Mr Robinson, who was the music master and organist. Vaughan Williams described him as a sensitive musician and a kind-hearted man who gave me and others leave to practice on the chapel organ. Music was not taught as part of the school curriculum. Most of the curriculum was devoted to the classics, particularly for those boys who wanted to go on to university. So a lot of Latin and Greek and very little else. But as Vaughan Williams later said, the arts, even the arts of music, were mildly encouraged, and a variety of musical experiences were available. Parents could pay extra for individual music tuition. The violin teacher at Charterhouse was an eminent but very elderly violinist named Joseph Dando. Vaughan Williams doesn't mention who taught him while he was at the school, but it's likely that it was Joseph Dando. And he also learned the piano and the organ. In addition, there was a school orchestra and several chamber music groups, not run by a professional musician, but by Mr Frederick Girdleston, of Girdleston Lights fame, who was a keen amateur musician. We know quite a lot about Ralph's musical experiences at Charterhouse because he wrote a reminiscence for the Carthusian, which was published in 1952, and there's also a biography written by his wife. And we've also got in the archives a number of concert programmes and reviews from the Carthusian magazine. So we know for certain that Ralph performed frequently in hall, just as pupils do today, playing the viola in the school orchestra and playing in string ensembles and also piano duets with his fellow pupils and also with the daughters of the headmaster who joined them for these events. Entertainments of all kinds were held in hall every Saturday evening, sometimes from professional musicians visiting and from actors, but often performed by staff and pupils. And they were extremely well attended by pupils and beaks because nobody went home at weekends. Transport was less available, and many pupils came from a long way, from a long way in the United Kingdom or overseas. So the Saturday evening entertainments were a big event. Panel doors between library and hall could be opened to create a double-length venue. If you look in hall where the gallery is, behind the gallery there are 3 arches that are blocked in, and that's where the panels could be drawn back to make this super long concert venue. Ralph was even allowed to perform several of his own compositions. A string trio in August 1888, for which there were 4 players, as Ralph recruited an additional player to join him on the viola line. And then in October 1888, Mr Girdleston asked Ralph to organise a concert of Welsh music as part of a series of 4 national programmes. And he not only recruited suitable players and chose the music, but he wrote a march entitled Cambria, which opened the concert. His ambition was to become a professional musician, but his family thought of his music as a harmless hobby, not a career choice. Gentlemen could be amateur musicians, but certainly did not perform professionally, with the exception of maybe respectable church organists. And for that reason, Ralph worked very hard at the organ, even though he preferred the viola. However, when he left Charterhouse, at the end of Cricket Quarter 1890, he was allowed to go to the Royal College of Music. Here he wanted to study composition with Hubert Parry, but first he had to pass his grade 5 theory, which surprisingly he had not done while at school. Having achieved this, Vaughan Williams recalls that Parry could hardly believe that I knew so little music, not exactly a ringing endorsement of Charterhouse's musical education in the 1880s. After 2 years at the Royal College, Vaughan Williams went up to Trinity College, Cambridge, where he took a Bachelor of Music and a BA in History. He was always very self-deprecating about his musical ability and wrote that neither his family nor his teachers expected him to amount to much as a musician. How wrong they were. I would really love to see the compositions that Vaughan Williams composed at Charterhouse, but sadly they have not survived. So, what remains of the school that Ralph would have known? The original Saunderites still stands, of course, now renamed as Sutton, but the house built by Mr Robinson in the 1870s on Twycross Road was demolished a century later to be replaced by the 1970s Robinites building that we all know. Ralph would have known the library, and he would have had hashes in the same hash rooms surrounding library and hall that you have hashes in today. The chapel where Ralph learned to play the organ and sang in the choir is now the old music school. It was deconsecrated when Memorial Chapel was completed in 1927, and then it was converted into music practice rooms by the architect Seeley and Paget in the late 1930s. Vaughan Williams actually returned to the school to open this new music school as it was then, in 1940, on which occasion he joined the school orchestra in a performance of Haydn's Toy Symphony, playing the cuckoo, while the headmaster, Robert Burley, conducted. It's a shame we don't have a recording of that. He also came back to hear the Charterhouse Masque, for which he arranged additional music in 1950. The Charterhouse Masque was an all-day open-air pageant celebrating Charterhouse's history, starting with the monks being thrown out of the London Charterhouse at the Reformation, and finishing with Baden-Powell successfully defending Mafeking in 1901. So a musical extravaganza that involved most of the school, either as actors or singers or orchestral players. It was performed 8 times between 1911 and 1972. Vaughan Williams's additional music was for the opening and for the final scene, which culminated in a grand arrangement of the school song, the Carmen Carthusianum, which Vaughan Williams rated as the best school song ever. Opinions vary on that one, but he did a very grand arrangement of it. This building is named in Vaughan Williams's honour, of course. The foundation stone was opened by his second wife, Ursula, in 1979, and she returned to open the finished building in 1983. Next time you are walking through the RVW, just take a few minutes to appreciate the reminders of our most famous composer. As you walk out into the lobby, you'll see a striking bronze frieze created by David McFall. Outside Dr. Millard's hash room, you'll see a preliminary study. It looks like almost like an unfinished portrait, and that's because it was a study for a much larger portrait of Vaughan Williams that is now in the Royal College of Music by Sir Gerald Kelly. And in Mr Shepherd's room, you will find a portrait of Ursula Vaughan Williams, his second wife. And next time you perform in hall, just ask yourself whether our next great composer is on the stage with you.
But I